everyone, my name is Unvi, and you're watching Through Their Eyes. For this week's episode, or this month's episode, I should say, we'll be discussing the privilege of humanity. So, first of all, let's just talk about what I mean by the privilege of humanity. So, in areas that are more economically developed, there are more socially developed people um, and societies in general. So, what I mean by that is in areas that are less economically developed, they tend to have societies that aren't as developed. So, this is usually a statement used to regard gender. However, it can also be used to regard the actions and different situations of people in those spaces. So, what I'm going to be discussing today about the privilege of humanity is just how people from different economic standpoints express their empathy. So I think it's pretty well known that if you are richer, the hardest thing you have to go through is the hardest thing you have to go through. So if the hardest thing you have to go through is, let's say, buying a house, which is difficult, that's a difficulty on its own. But then for others, it could be, walking 10 miles to school, like a few of my family members did. Or it could even be, going through war and types of injustice that we can't really fathom here in the United States as much as we could fathom if we were a part of another country. So, for that reason, I wanted to just discuss those factors, but also discuss the significance it has, not only on people of those areas, but also in general, because it's just so important. I think everyone's seen the news, and on the news, it's not really looking too pretty. We have wars all over the place, and I think it's really important that we as humans really tap into that more empathetic side of us and also really look into how we can improve not only our lives but also the lives around us. So first of all, let's just talk about people who are in these more economic situations that aren't so amazing. Let's just say that. So most of the times, these people don't really have that privilege to have long-term planning. So because of this, a lot of the times they think in short term experiences. For example, this could be how do we get, basic living needs like water or shelter or food, rather than the long term of how can I continuously provide food and water and shelter for my family. It's always the next day rather than the next month or the next year because that's just the resources they were provided, and that's the type of standpoint they have to take on in order to continue surviving. Along with that, life experiences really shape their beliefs because, I mean, that's not just them, that's also us. I mean, if we grow up in areas like, more rich and more urbanized, that we are also, given the access to a lot of resources, especially a quality education, we will tend to, have different beliefs than those who may have had scarcity and all of those different factors. For that reason, a lot of the times people don't have as much empathy when they grow up in hardship because they aren't afforded that ability to have that empathy. That moral relativism is basically it's very different from ours because it's like you're stealing to survive. You're not stealing out of the moral good or not. I think for a lot of us, we are given those wonderful opportunities to have a lot of money and to be able to spend it in ways that we see fit. But for a lot of people in the globe, we aren't really seeing that they have those opportunities. They have to steal, they have to get into a few shady things in order to survive. So we have to really look at those things and say, are they afforded the opportunity to choose a different life for themselves, or is this something that they have to do in order to continue surviving? Along with that, as I previously said, education is so extremely important. In the United States, I know some of us like to say that our education system, especially with current affairs going on, may not be the best. Now, while I may say that to us Americans it might not be amazing, compared to the education systems of certain countries around the world, we are very much not falling behind. At the same time, I will not deny the fact that we have things that we need to improve as a country when it comes to our education system, especially in the South, which is known for being infrastructurally like 3 or 5 years behind the rest of the country, which is definitely not a good look. But regardless of that, in other countries, right, and I'd say other countries like sub-Saharan Africa, that is not a country itself, it's a region, but a lot of those countries in sub-Saharan Africa are war-torn, especially in the Sahel region, and then they have a lot of poverty that they deal with, and they can't provide educational opportunities for their students, especially other countries too. Maybe you have a country like India or China or whatnot, and it's like overall the country is, suffering, but at the same time they have a lot of people. They have a lot of people to like provide for, and along with that, they are still nations that are developing, and for that reason there are still regions of those countries, especially in Asia, that have people who can't have access to wealth and education and all of the resources that they need to. So for that reason, I think it's really important for us to take into account the different life experiences that people go through, and also how that impacts not only their decisions but also how it impacts their mentality. If you are always in a place of just being constantly on guard and wanting to fend for yourself and fend for your livelihood, you're not going to be someone who is easily trusting and someone who is believing that the world is a wonderful place. Maybe you will, maybe you won't, but more of the time, trauma and a lot of other things of that nature really prevent that empathy from occurring. So there's also a thing, and it's called moral poverty. And moral poverty is basically and specifically the poverty of children. And what I mean by that is it can technically go to adults as well, but it's usually used for children. So a lot of the times, these children not only are impoverished when it comes to the physical resources like their food, water, shelter, they are also impoverished in the state of mind. And what I mean by that is they are not told right from wrong early on. There is no one to necessarily guide them, or if they are being guided, they're being guided in a situation that is of extreme scarcity. So if their parents are putting certain ideals forward, right, like, oh, we have a scarcity mindset and that we're always living in the short term and whatnot, then that child is going to have that moral poverty, and then they are going to adopt these certain I guess, morals, even though they may potentially, be in a better living situation later on in their life. I think a great example of this is immigrants who migrate from, their homes and come to maybe the United States or other countries of the West. For a lot of these people, they had to work immensely hard in order to ensure that they could survive and that they could, come all the way to the United States and really help us out here. And immigrants is a whole other story of why they're very beneficial to our country. After all, we are a country of immigrants, though our immigration is very much like wide in, who came here and when they came. But regardless of that, a lot of the times immigrants have these mindsets, and when they come to the United States and they don't necessarily have to have those scarcity mindsets anymore, it's very hard for them to dissociate from that and then have more, I guess you could say, freedom to spend. I think in my father's situation especially, though he's in the United States and though he's really fending for himself, and he has his life together, at the same time it's just very difficult for him to really move past that mentality of, oh, we have to spend less and we have to make ourselves less of a burden, because growing up he was unconsciously taught that he had to make himself less of a burden for his family because his family was, fighting for their survival. So just even though it seems so far away, like, oh, it's in Africa, oh, that's in India, oh, that's in China, a lot of the times, either it's immigrants or either it's people in our own country that suffer from these not only moral poverty, but also like poverty in general, and then the lack of empathy that may come from it. Not to say that these people are naturally unempathetic, but just that the fact that they've gone through so much has hindered a lot of that development of their empathy. I think in a previous episode, which is one of my favorite episodes, and I think I've referenced it before. If you guys are interested, you should go watch that. And it is called, I think it's called Empathy and Animalistic Nature. I'm not too sure, but it's something along those lines. And there we discuss how people both have empathy and then that animalistic selfishness of throughout them as well, and that they're both equally part of humanity. And I think when we talk about humanity here, we're talking more about that empathetic side. So a lot of the times, people who come from these impoverished areas aren't necessarily, unempathetic and sweet and kind. Rather, a lot of those things are suppressed because they don't aid in survival. Empathy is something that us humans gain when we are happy and stable. It is not something that we gain when we are, having a threat to our survival, because in those situations, we need to really rely on our animalistic nature in order to really further us and further our goals. So I think that's just another thing to keep in mind. Maybe you may not be suffering, but your neighbor is, and I think we should all love thy neighbor in this situation, even if you're not Christian. I know I'm not, but it's just a wonderful thing to keep in mind. So yeah, just have awareness of that. That was the main reason I wanted to talk about this. But speaking of this, let's talk about some examples. Just will just help us, have a better grasp on what I'm talking about, but also I can further, discuss these specific things. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is the Somali pirates. I think a lot of people who, are really into history, or they, heard this on the news, they'll know about the Somali pirates. So let's just get into that. The Somali pirates weren't necessarily pirates in the beginning. So Somalia, its government had basically collapsed in 1991 or around that time, and for this reason, they had like warlords controlling different regions of Somalia, which went as well as you might think, which is basically not as well at all. A lot of the times, these warlords were fighting each other, and it was just a lot of disputes. So you would have these Somali fishermen, especially. They had to make their livelihood on, fishing and ensuring that they could have money because their government collapsed and, their country is in financial ruin, which is a very big consequence of colonialism, or colonization, I should say, not colonialism. I'm so sorry. But yeah, colonization. I always mix those two up. And I think for that reason, it really helps us understand, that a lot of the times there's always deeper, more systemic reasons why poverty exists rather than the fact that it's just laziness, but that's something we'll get into later. So for now, I want to talk about them and how a lot of the times these Somali pirates basically partnered with these warlords in order to basically fend their waters away from other people who were also fishing there. So the Horn of Africa, it was a great fishing spot, but a lot of these like European fishers, go figure, colonization once colonization again, but in a different form, they were basically, taking the fish from the Somali waters. So these Somali fishermen, it basically started with them just defending their livelihood and, like fighting these European fishers in order to ensure that they could continue to fish. But eventually, what happened is these warlords, they took over the business and then made it more of a piracy thing. So eventually, what happened was these fishermen who wanted to protect their livelihood and, protect themselves, eventually turned into a situation where these people were basically, now stealing fish off of these European boats and basically mugging people on the high seas. So even though it started as something that was, quite human and quite touching, it kind of began to become something that was a more like exploitative. So it really leads us to the question of like, are people responsible if survival basically pushed them? And I think that's something we'll also talk about later, but I just want you guys to think about that right now. The next example I have going on is the child soldiers of multiple different countries, but especially the DRC. A lot of the times when there is war, especially civil war, there is a loss of morality because there is just so much to fight for. Um, I'm extremely grateful for the fact that I have never had to, start a civil war against my country or my people. Because I felt that my rights were being extremely violated. Of course, there's protests and there's other things of the sort, but a civil war is a completely different entity. And I think in those situations, there's this lack of morality because the situation is just so dire, it's so extreme. You're fighting for your basic human rights or for your ability to exist, basically. And I think for that reason, it can lead to a lot of wrongs occurring, such as child soldiers. And as we talked about before, these child soldiers suffer from moral poverty because they have to grow up extremely quickly. So not only do they have PTSD, they also have CPTSD. CPTSD is childhood PTSD. Which is basically just the amalgamation of horrible traumatic events throughout the course of your childhood, which is a very different but still horrible form of PTSD. So now they have both of those, and of course they, may be suffering from the lack of food and other resources, but it's also the fact that they have a loss of childhood. And so when they grow up, they may not have the same empathy as another person. And so it really, again, leads us to the whole thing of, like, can we blame them for this? Can we blame um, these children for all of these things? Especially there's a lot of debates on the fact that these children may have killed like a bunch of people and whatnot, and it's like, oh, is that excusable? Like, they're children, right? So that's another debate that's going on. It's like it's a constant issue of ethics and morality in a very big situation where morality isn't always so easily given, and it really can't be. And I think in those situations, in my opinion, they cannot be judged so linearly because it's just such a complex situation that really needs empathy in order to judge it, quite ironically, because you need to have empathy for your neighbors and your like, not only your friends and family but also the people in the world around you. And I think through the, I guess, increasing of empathy overall, we will be able to, not only have a brighter future, but also be able to, prevent these horrible things from, maybe occurring, or at least lessen the load of it. I think the last thing I want to talk about is something that was very, very, I guess you could say, common. So this is the last example I have, and it's basically dangerous labor. So this is more of a mild case compared to the Somali pirates and child soldiers, but it's very real. I have a lot of friends who actually have like family who worked in the coal mines in the United States. And then they were, doing a lot of dangerous work in those situations. And then I have family as well who worked in the coal mines in India, right? And that's just very dangerous. A lot of the times when you go into the coal mines, right, you have all of those like toxic fumes, and then you also have like the shaft maybe like coming down on you and hurting you. And then there's a lot of other situations that come on with that, like, I guess, with that work. But there's also other really dangerous work as well. Like, oh, you could be making like bricks in Nepal as like a child slave as well. That's another like part of more extreme, I guess, dangerous labor. But I know from my grandparents and great grandparents as well, they did like the work of, like building houses out of these chemicals, or not chemicals, but these components that weren't necessarily the safest, right? So these types of dangerous labor can be, very common, not only to people of a certain region, but I think to people all around the world, especially if it's like, tracing back to their grandparents or their great grandparents. They know that they've had to, deal with all of those things and go through all of those things. And I think for that reason, it really shows the variety of, situations that people have to go through when it comes to the dangerous ones. But along with that, it also shows how prevalent the issue is, because it's like, you can't expect people who, may have gone through very dangerous situations to have those same ideals for life, because again, your life experience shapes your beliefs, right? So they would probably have very different beliefs than I would necessarily. So I guess back to the question that we were talking about before, it's, are people responsible if survival pushed them? And I think everyone, no matter what they have done, is responsible for their actions. Because I guess I would use an example as this. It would be, if you get into a car accident, I don't think you're intentionally trying to get into a car accident, right? You're not intentionally trying to, let's say, like run into a tree, but it's like you still ran into a tree, like, and maybe you got another car out too in the process, right? Now you're responsible not only for your own like insurance, but also theirs as well, or like their costs as well. And I think that's a good example because even though we aren't intentionally doing something, or we're not doing something out of the want to necessarily cause harm, it is still something that we've done. And I think we should all take the responsibility for our actions. So I think while they may, have to take responsibility, I think we should also be very empathetic in how exactly they would be taking responsibility for their actions. Because again, you can't punish someone so linearly for something that they may have done due to external circumstances. So I think it really does depend, because we should, number, like, on one hand, very much take the things they've done into account, but at the same time it's equally important in order to ensure that we're understanding why they didn't, and what situations led them to it, in order to ensure that we are not only building a more empathetic community, but a stronger and more reliable justice system. I think, actually, on a tangent, justice systems are not necessarily things that I think AI will be able to take over, because it's just so human. It has to be. And I think there's a lot of corruption, and I think that AI can play a part in it. But overall, I think humans, we have to, use that empathy and use those good characteristics of ours in order to really improve the justice system, even though it is, very corrupt due to a lot of people, manipulating it. I think it's just a very important thing for us to take into account, that we must really try to add empathy into that system. I think after that, I would like to talk about, like, poverty as a moral issue, and then also, is crime, more of a poverty issue, and is it more of a morality issue? And I think it's honestly a poverty issue for a lot of places. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean it's always a poverty issue. Sometimes it could be a morality issue as well. But I think a lot of the times those things have a direct correlation, because if you grow up in an area that's a little rougher around the edges, and you aren't necessarily being raised with the most amazing ideals due to that moral poverty again, then it makes sense why you would rely on crime to maybe steal or to get your way, because you aren't given those adequate resources in order to defend for yourself, right? So I really think it depends on the situation, but I think at the same time it really can also have its roots in poverty. And I think poverty, as a moral virtue, doesn't necessarily make sense. I think in the United States, especially, or in more developed nations, we tend to view poverty, or I guess being, like, having less resources, as something that is, morally, like, wonderful, in the sense of, like, oh, you're spending less money, or oh, you're more humble about it. It's like people like to see that you aren't necessarily flaunting your money. And I think there's a lot of religious traditions as well, in a variety of different religions, that basically have you be poor for a while. And I think while that is a good idea, in the sense of it helps to bring clarity and awareness to the poverty that people go through, at the same time, it may not always be a clear representation of the true struggles that people with poverty have to go through. And I think sometimes it may actually be worse, because if people who've never had to experience poverty and suffering now, maybe have, like, not even a religious practice, but, like, look at people who are quote unquote poor, or maybe their idea of, living a more modest life is just not buying a Starbucks every day, or something of that sort, then it can lead to a very toxic situation, of the fact that a lot of the times these people may look down on impoverished people, and, say that, oh, they're only poor because they couldn't get a job, or oh, they're only poor because of this, like, very, very, I guess, surface level of reason without taking into the fact that it can be so much deeper than that, and the roots are go so much deeper than that. I think at the same time we also have to understand that poverty can um, really have a different meaning in our society as an American society compared to other societies as well. Because I think it's a dual-headed coin for us in the United States, and I think it's a similar way as well in, I think, more developing countries as well. But I think it differs in the fact that for some it's their reality, and for us, overall, it tends to be something that we hear in the news. And I say overall because the United States, we are one of the richer nations in the world, but if you go to like West Virginia or you go to like more impoverished parts of the country, I will not deny that there is, the same poverty I'm talking about, as there is in like Asia or Africa or whatnot. Um, Along with that, I think that a lot of the times people can get out of these situations, or not get out of necessarily, but mentally avoid that moral poverty, get out of that moral poverty through the importance of, their cultural beliefs in their society. I know a lot of people in India, they have a strong Hindu faith, and Hinduism is more of an ethnic religion, and it's not necessarily like, it's more of a way of life than it is a religion itself. But a lot of the times, these people who practice Hinduism, even though they live in these impoverished areas and they are denied a lot of their basic like rights and resources, they still are able to maintain that privilege of humanity because of their society, keeping them human, because of their religion keeping them human. And I think religion is just one of the biggest things that's helped society not only function but also maintain itself and grow and evolve. So even if you aren't religious, just having faith in the world and in yourself can be such a powerful driving motor, especially if you are in a situation where you're like losing hope. So I think a lot of the times for these people in like these villages and whatnot, especially, Hinduism has helped them have a stronger community connection and really take light of what exactly they have, but also ensure that they are also um, making the best of everything, and maybe even like allowing them to seek better opportunities that could allow their, families to be in a better place. I think a lot of the times that could be something that would be beneficial, and I think that's something that we should really think about having in, our United States, but also around the world, like having that increased empathy and, having those societal connections as well. I think overall, as we like end this episode, because I don't have a co-host, so I don't want to take too much of your time. I think this really matters because we need to foster understanding and become more mindful. I think in the world we're so full of hate, and I think for a long time we've been so full of hate with so much war and decay and so much just all of the negative stuff basically, going around. It's very, very hard to remain not only conscious of other people but also understanding of them as well. I think especially as people from the United States, we tend to be more judgmental or quick to judge because we have that privilege to. And I think for that reason we must understand that people are given a different deck of cards than we are, and for that reason they have, different things that they're going through. Along with that, I think it's extremely important that we recognize that the government and the people are two different entities, not empathy. I've been saying empathy way too much this episode, so that's what came out. Like for example, some people may not be happy with our current government, and they may instead be saying like the people of America are very different from the government of America, and that could be very well true. And I think for that reason, if we, choose to designate ourselves with that label, what's stopping us from designating other countries and other areas and regions and nations of the world with those similar ideals? Like, how can we look at their people? Because if people are suffering, if people are being indoctrinated to think one thing, those are the people. But we should look at the source, we should look at the root. who is doing the indoctrination? Why are they doing the indoctrination? You know, like, how does that play into how the people are not only developing, but how the people are, you know, having a different mindset? So the next time you see something on the news, of course, you should, you know, be more researched on it. But at the same time, it wouldn't hurt to necessarily go and think on what exactly are those people dealing with, and how is maybe their government or another external factor influencing their thoughts. Along with that, I think that we should never necessarily hate a person off the bat, and we should really try to have the empathy in order to ensure that our world is a better place. But I hope you guys take that message, and I hope that you guys all know that everything will be okay. I'm really happy that you guys are here and listening to me speak. I know it's been a while, so thank you very much for tuning in. Regardless, have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you next month.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com and DeltaForce.net.